The full moon ceremony was supposed to mark the beginning of Liessa Vale's future. Instead, it became the night her entire pack watched her break. Silver firelight burned around the sacred mating grounds, while hundreds of wolves gathered beneath towering pine trees. Elders stood beside the ceremonial stones dressed in heavy fur cloaks. Young wolves whispered excitedly from the outer circles. At the center platform stood Liessa and Darian Voss, future alpha heir, future leader of the Frostfang pack, future mate. At least, that was what everyone believed, until Darian suddenly stepped backward. "I reject her." The words cracked through the night so sharply, the entire mating ground froze. Liessa felt the mate bond snap instantly inside her chest. Pain tore through her so violently her knees almost gave out. Gasps erupted through the crowd. Then came the whispers. "She's being rejected publicly. During the ceremony, I heard her wolf barely shifts." Darian looked completely unaffected by the devastation spreading around him. In fact, he looked relieved. "She's weak," he announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "A future Luna should strengthen the bloodline, not embarrass it." A few younger alphas laughed quietly nearby. Liessa heard every second. But the worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was the silence afterward. No one defended her. Not the elders who watched her grow up. Not the women who once braided flowers into her hair during festivals. Not even her own father standing near the council stones. He lowered his eyes instead, ashamed. Not of Darian, of her. Something inside Liessa went cold. Darian crossed his arms loosely before delivering the final humiliation. "She should be grateful I waited this long." More laughter followed. The sound echoed across the mountainside beneath the full moon. Liessa stared at him quietly. This male once promised forever beneath winter stars. Now, he needed a crowd to feel powerful enough to destroy her. And somehow, that hurt more than the rejection itself. An elder finally stepped forward carefully. "Liessa, perhaps if you trained your wolf more aggressively." "No," Darian interrupted immediately. "I'm done pretending she belongs beside me." The bond pain pulsed again through Liessa's chest. Sharp, humiliating, permanent. Still, she refused to cry. That seemed to unsettle people more than tears would have. Slowly, Liessa looked around the mating grounds one final time. Every face blurred together eventually. Pity, discomfort, cowardice. Not one person stepped toward her, so she made her decision quietly, without begging, without screaming, without giving them the satisfaction. Liessa turned away from the ceremonial platform and began walking toward the forest path beyond the village. Someone called her name once behind her. She didn't stop. Snow had started falling lightly through the mountain air by the time she reached the outer pack gates. Cold wind wrapped around her thin ceremonial cloak. Behind her, the ceremony resumed. Music, talking, laughter. The pack continued celebrating after destroying one of their own. Liessa kept walking anyway, because the most dangerous thing born that night wasn't heartbreak. It was the moment she realized she no longer needed any of them to survive. And somewhere deep beneath the agony of the broken mate bond, her wolf finally stopped waiting to be chosen. Winter nearly killed Liessa during the first month alone. The mountains didn't care about heartbreak. They cared about survival. The northern cliffs beyond Frostfang territory were brutal, even for experienced wolves. Snowstorms swallowed entire trails overnight. Ice cracked beneath careless footsteps. Hunting became impossible for days, whenever blizzards rolled through the valleys. And Liessa, the weak omega the pack mocked, survived anyway. At first, she lived inside abandoned hunter shelters scattered through the forest. then caves, then finally a small broken cabin near the river cliffs. She repaired herself one frozen morning with bleeding hands and stubborn exhaustion. No one helped her, which eventually became freeing. The bond pain faded slowly over the years, not completely. Some wounds learned how to sleep instead of heal, but Liesa stopped noticing the ache every morning eventually. That mattered enough. By the second winter, she learned the mountain trails better than most wolves knew their own territory. She hunted elk alone, set traps, collected herbs beneath dangerous cliff edges, and somewhere during those long, isolated years, she became strong without realizing it. The first injured wolf found her during spring thaw. A young rogue male collapsed near the riverbank with iron trap wounds buried deep in his front leg. Liesa almost kept walking. Almost. Instead, she carried him back to the cabin herself. He left 3 days later without speaking much. A month afterward, another wounded wolf appeared near the mountains. Then another. Then more. Word spread quietly through nearby territories. A woman lived alone in the northern cliffs. A strange omega. Some called her cursed. Others called her a mountain witch. People claimed injured wolves entered her cabin barely breathing and returned healed days later. Liesa ignored the rumors completely. People always needed stories to explain women surviving without permission. By the 4th year, nobody from Frostfang territory came searching anymore. Not her father, not old friends, certainly not Darien. The pack had erased her easily. That realization should have hurt. Instead, it became peaceful. One evening, Liesa stood outside her cabin crushing herbs into medicine paste, while snow drifted softly through the trees around her. The mountains were quiet tonight. Too quiet. Her wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin. Then she smelled it. Alpha. Not ordinary alpha scent either. This rolled through the forest like thunder before a storm. Wild, ancient, terrifyingly powerful. Liesa straightened instantly. The pressure alone made nearby birds flee the trees. Heavy footsteps followed moments later, somewhere deeper in the woods. Controlled, massive. The ground itself seemed to vibrate faintly beneath each step. Every survival instinct Liesa developed over the past years sharpened immediately. Predator, danger, run. But the scent reaching her now carried something stranger beneath the violence. Blood. The alpha was injured. Liesa reached slowly for the hunting knife strapped beside her thigh as the forest around the cabin suddenly went still. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then, a gigantic shadow moved between the snow-covered trees. Silver eyes appeared first through the darkness. Ancient eyes. Wolf eyes. And for the first time since leaving Frostfang territory, Liesa felt something dangerously unfamiliar curl inside her chest. Not fear, recognition. The massive figure stepped closer, slowly beneath the moonlight. Battle scars crossed broad shoulders and thick muscle beneath partially shifted skin. Blood stained his side heavily, but despite the injury, he still looked powerful enough to destroy armies. Liesa tightened her grip on the knife instinctively, because somehow, deep down, she already knew this alpha would change everything the moment he reached her cabin. The massive alpha emerged fully from the forest shadows moments later, and Liesa immediately understood why entire territories feared his name. Kaelor Draven looked less like a man and more like something ancient the mountains themselves created. Over 7 feet tall in partial shift form, he towered above the snowy clearing with terrifying stillness. Silver eyes glowed beneath dark hair, dampened by melting snow, while deep scars crossed his throat, chest, and forearms like old battlefield warnings. Blood soaked the left side of his coat. Fresh. A dangerous amount of it. But somehow, the injury only made him look more lethal. Liesa kept the hunting knife raised anyway. "Stop there." Kaelor obeyed instantly. Not submissively, carefully, like he recognized frightened animals needed space. His wolf pushed violently beneath his skin the moment his gaze settled fully on her. The reaction shook him visibly. A deep growl escaped his chest. Possessive, instinctive, not threatening, that almost frightened Liesa more. "Easy," she warned sharply. Kaelor's breathing roughened slightly as he stared at her. "There you are." The words landed strangely between them, like he'd been searching for something without realizing it until now. Liesa frowned immediately. "You're bleeding all over my mountain." One corner of Kaelor's mouth almost moved. Almost. "So I've been told." His voice was deep enough to vibrate through the cold air itself. Liesa refused to acknowledge how aware of him her wolf suddenly became. Dangerously aware. "Who are you?" she asked carefully. Kaelor studied her another long second before answering. "Kaelor Draven." Recognition hit instantly. Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The giant ruler neighboring packs whispered about like a war legend. The male who supposedly ended border rebellions bare-handed during his first year as king. Liesa's grip tightened around the knife. What does the Alpha King want with a mountain healer? Kaelor took one slow step closer. Her wolf reacted violently, not fearful, restless. That unsettled her immediately. Then Kaelor staggered slightly. Blood loss. The massive alpha caught himself against a nearby tree before straightening again with visible irritation. Liesa sighed sharply. "Wonderful." Kaelor blinked once. "You sound disappointed." "I was hoping the terrifying stranger outside my cabin wouldn't collapse tonight." That earned the faintest visible amusement from him. Then his expression hardened again as his wolf surged beneath his skin once more. The scent between them thickened dangerously. Mate, impossible. Kaelor's jaw tightened visibly, like he was fighting the instinct himself. Liesa noticed immediately. So did her wolf. "No," she said quickly. Kaelor's silver eyes locked onto hers. "No? You don't get to scent me like that." His expression shifted slightly. Not offended. Interested. Most wolves feared challenging him directly. Liesa sounded irritated instead. "You recognized my scent before seeing me," Kaelor said quietly. "That's what happens when the forest suddenly smells like war." Another almost smile. Small. Dangerous. Then Kaelor's eyes sharpened suddenly as he studied her more carefully. Too carefully. "You were rejected." Liesa froze instantly. Snow drifted silently between them. "How do you know that?" Kaelor stepped closer again, despite the blood still running down his side. "Because your wolf reacts like it learned survival before affection." The words hit harder than rejection ever had. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. And no one, not once in all these years, had understood her that quickly before. Silence crashed heavily across the clearing. Then Kaelor swayed slightly again from blood loss. Liesa closed her eyes briefly in frustration. "This is unbelievable." Kaelor frowned faintly. "What is? You're either my greatest problem," she pointed toward the cabin sharply, "or my dumbest patient. Get inside before you die, on my porch." For the first time since arriving, the Alpha King obeyed immediately. Kaelor barely fit inside the cabin. The moment he stepped through the doorway, the small mountain home suddenly felt too narrow for something built to survive wars. Liesa shut the door behind him hard enough to rattle the walls. "You're dripping blood everywhere." Kaylor glanced calmly toward the growing stain across the wooden floorboards. I noticed. You should have noticed before crossing 3 territories half dead. His silver eyes shifted toward her immediately. You know how far I traveled? I know no ordinary alpha carries scent pressure like yours. Liessa moved toward the medicine shelves, lining the cabin walls, while Kaylor quietly removed the torn upper half of his coat. She turned back, then stopped cold. Scars, dozens of them. Old claw marks layered over sword wounds, and half-healed bites spread across thick muscle and bronzed skin. This wasn't a king who ruled from behind palace walls. This was a wolf who survived brutality personally. Kaylor noticed her staring. Problem? You fight too much. I win too much, he corrected calmly. Liessa rolled her eyes before kneeling beside the table to prepare stitching thread and herbs. Sit down. Kaylor obeyed again without argument. That unsettled her almost as much as the mate instinct clawing between them. Most powerful alphas demanded control constantly. Kaylor watched her work instead, quietly, intently. The silence stretched long enough to become dangerous. Finally, Liessa spoke first. What happened? Border hunters. You crossed into rogue territory alone? They crossed into mine first. Liessa cleaned the deep slash across his ribs carefully, while Kaylor studied her face with unnerving focus. You don't flinch from scars, he observed. I've treated worse. You've lived worse too. Her hands paused briefly, only for a second. Still, Kaylor noticed. Of course he did. Stop analyzing me, Liessa muttered. You hide pain like someone taught you emotions were weakness. That sounds hypocritical coming from you. Another faint, almost smile touched his mouth, then disappeared. Liessa hated how aware she was becoming of every tiny expression he made, especially because Kaylor himself seemed equally affected. The cabin smelled overwhelmingly of both their scents now. Pine smoke, medicine herbs, snow, wolf, mate. Impossible. Kaylor's jaw flexed again, like he was restraining something violent beneath the surface. Finally, he asked quietly, Who rejected you? Liessa kept wrapping fresh bandages around his ribs. That's none of your business. He rejected you publicly. Her eyes snapped toward him instantly. Kaylor held her gaze steadily. How do you know that? Because humiliation leaves different wounds than heartbreak. Silence, sharp, deadly accurate. Liessa looked away first. Mistake. Because Kaylor noticed the old pain immediately. He made you feel small in front of others. Kaylor continued quietly. And eventually, you started believing isolation hurt less than people. The bandage tightened harder, accidentally beneath Liessa's hands. Kaylor didn't react, didn't even blink. You don't know anything about me. No, he admitted calmly. But my wolf does. That answer sent heat sharply through the room. Liessa stood immediately and moved toward the fireplace before the tension became unbearable. Outside, snow hammered harder against the cabin windows. Inside, the silence shifted into something more dangerous now. Not fear, awareness. Kaylor watched her from across the firelight for a long moment before speaking again. The alpha, who rejected you. His voice lowered slightly. If he stood in front of me now... Liessa frowned. What? Kaylor's silver eyes darkened visibly. I'd break his jaw for making you think survival was the closest thing to safety you deserved. The room went completely still, because no one had ever sounded angry on her behalf before. And somehow, that frightened Liessa more than the mate bond ever could. News traveled faster through wolf territories than winter storms, especially news involving powerful alphas. Within days, rumors spread across neighboring packs that the Alpha King of the Northern Territories had been seen entering the mountains repeatedly. Not with soldiers, not for war, for a woman. That alone drew attention. Then came the second rumor. The mysterious mountain healer living beyond the cliffs was an Omega, and suddenly, Darien Voss remembered Liesa existed. The first warning arrived through scent. Multiple wolves approaching the mountain trails together. Liesa looked up immediately. From the herbs she was drying outside the cabin. Kaelor emerged from the forest moments later, carrying 2 freshly hunted rabbits over one shoulder. The instant he noticed her expression, his own hardened. "You smell them too." Liesa nodded once. 6 wolves. Kaelor's silver eyes narrowed slightly toward the southern ridge. "Cowards," he muttered, because only desperate males traveled armed into another Alpha's mountain territory. Minutes later, Darien Voss stepped into the clearing with 5 pack wolves behind him, and immediately stopped walking. Kaelor stood beside Liesa calmly, massive, terrifying. His presence alone made Darien's escorts visibly uneasy. The future Alpha heir swallowed, before forcing confidence back onto his face. "My king," he greeted carefully, "I didn't realize these mountains belonged to you." Kaelor's expression never changed. "They don't." A pause. "She does." The silence afterward turned brutal instantly. Liesa saw the exact moment realization hit Darien. Kaelor valued her, protected her, wanted her, and suddenly the Omega Darien discarded years ago looked politically valuable again. Darien straightened slightly. "I came to speak with Liesa privately." "No," Kaelor answered immediately. Darien's jaw tightened. "This concerns our former bond." Kaelor stepped forward once. Just once. Every wolf behind Darien instinctively backed up. "You lost the privilege of speaking about bonds," Kaelor said calmly, "the night you publicly destroyed one." Liesa watched Darien carefully. Years ago, his approval controlled her entire world. Now, standing beside Kaelor, he looked painfully small. Darien finally turned toward her directly. "I made mistakes." Liesa almost laughed. "You announced my rejection in front of the entire pack. I was young. You told everyone I was weak." His expression shifted quickly. "I didn't understand your value." There it was. Not regret. Value. Political usefulness. The exact thing Kaelor recognized immediately, too. The giant Alpha King's wolf surged violently beneath his skin. "You came back," Kaelor said softly, "because another Alpha wanted what you threw away." Darien ignored him stubbornly. "The bond between us can still recover." "No," Liesa interrupted calmly. Silence crashed through the clearing. "The bond died the night you needed a crowd to feel powerful." One of Darien's wolves looked away immediately, ashamed. "Good," Liesa continued, before anyone could interrupt. "You rejected me because you thought weakness lowered your status." She glanced briefly toward Kaelor beside her. "Funny how quickly your standards changed once someone stronger decided I mattered." That landed perfectly. Darien's face darkened with humiliation. Years ago, Liesa would have apologized to soften his embarrassment. Now she simply looked tired of him. The mountain wind howled sharply through the clearing, while tension thickened dangerously between both Alphas. Then, Darien made the mistake that destroyed everything. He stepped toward Liesa and grabbed her wrist. "Enough," he snapped. "You're coming home, so we can fix." Kaelor moved instantly, fast enough that nobody actually saw him cross the distance. 1 second, Darien stood upright. The next, his body slammed violently against a tree hard enough to crack bark beneath the impact. And suddenly, every wolf in the clearing realized exactly how dangerous the Alpha King truly was. Darien choked violently against Kaelor's grip. The giant alpha held him suspended against the tree with one hand, while snow crashed from broken branches overhead. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, because Kalor Draven no longer looked entirely human. Silver burned brightly through his eyes, while his wolf pushed savagely beneath partially shifted skin. Claws extended visibly from his fingers against Darian's throat. Ancient alpha dominance rolled through the mountain clearing, hard enough to force weaker wolves backward instinctively. Even Darian's escorts lowered their heads. Submission, fear, survival. Kalor's voice dropped into something monstrous. You rejected her publicly. He slammed Darian harder against the tree. Wood cracked sharply behind him. Then came back once another alpha valued her. Darian clawed desperately at Kalor's wrist. I was wrong. No, Kalor interrupted coldly. You were cruel. Liessa stood frozen several feet away. Not frightened, stunned, because nobody had ever defended her like this before. Not once. Kalor leaned closer toward Darian slowly. She survived years alone, because males like you confuse humiliation with strength. Another violent growl shook through the clearing. The mountain wolves flattened their ears instantly. Darian's face had gone pale from lack of air. My king, one escort finally whispered shakily. He'll die. Kalor's eyes shifted toward the wolves surrounding them, and somehow that terrified them even more. Good, he said quietly. Silence exploded afterward. Liessa moved before thinking. Kalor. The Alpha King froze immediately. His wolf reacted to her voice instantly. Not submissive, responsive, controlled. Liessa stepped closer, carefully, through the snow. That's enough. Kalor stared at her for one long, dangerous second, then finally released Darian hard enough to send him collapsing into the snow beneath the tree. The former alpha heir coughed violently while his escorts rushed toward him. None of them challenged. Kalor, none even looked directly at him anymore, because now they understood the truth. If Liessa hadn't spoken, Darian would already be dead. Kalor remained standing between Liessa and the others, like an executioner deciding whether violence was finished yet. Darian struggled shakily back onto one knee. This isn't over, he rasped. Kalor stepped forward once, only once. Every wolf behind Darian immediately retreated. The giant Alpha King looked absolutely terrifying now. You publicly discarded loyalty, Kalor said coldly. No neighboring territory will trust your leadership again. Darian's expression tightened, because he knew it was true. News traveled quickly between packs, and weak leaders who humiliated mates publicly rarely kept respect long afterward. Kalor's voice lowered further. You taught your wolves that devotion deserves ridicule. Another step closer. You taught your pack cruelty earns applause. Darian lowered his gaze first. Submission again, complete this time. Kalor looked disgusted. Leave. Nobody argued. Within seconds, Darian's wolves were dragging him back toward the southern mountain trails through deep snow. Not one of them looked back. Silence settled heavily over the clearing afterward. The storm had softened now. Snow drifted quietly around the cabin, while Kalor's breathing slowly steadied. His wolf still paced violently beneath his skin, though. Liessa watched him carefully. You almost killed him. Kalor looked toward her immediately. He touched you. The answer came too fast, too honestly. Liessa's breath caught slightly. Kalor seemed to realize what he admitted a second later, because his expression shifted sharply. Not regret, awareness, dangerous awareness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Liessa glanced toward the empty mountain trail, where Darian disappeared. You know what the strange part is? Kaelor frowned slightly. What? Liessa looked back at him calmly. For years I imagined someone defending me like that. A pause. I just never thought it would be a king. And somehow, that affected Kaelor more than any battle victory ever had. Kaelor stayed in the mountains long after Darian left. At first, Liessa assumed it was because of unfinished border patrols or political obligations nearby. Then 3 days passed. Then 7. Eventually, she stopped pretending his continued presence didn't affect her. The giant Alpha King repaired broken fencing around the cabin without being asked. He hunted during snowstorms before Liessa could leave safely. Once, she even caught him quietly stacking fresh firewood outside, while believing she still slept. No Alpha had ever done something gentle for her without expecting obedience afterward. That unsettled her more than open aggression ever could. "You're staring again," Liessa muttered one evening while grinding herbs beside the fireplace. Kaelor looked up from repairing one of the cabin chairs. "You notice everything. That isn't an answer." His silver eyes studied her calmly. "I'm trying to understand how your pack looked at you and saw weakness." Liessa's hands paused briefly over the herbs, then continued moving. "They saw an Omega who struggled shifting. I see someone who survived isolation. Most wolves wouldn't endure for a month." Silence settled heavily between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Outside, snow hammered softly against the cabin roof, while firelight flickered, warm gold, across the walls. Kaelor finally spoke again. "My wolf scented you across 3 territories." Liessa glanced up carefully. "That shouldn't be possible." "It isn't." The quiet certainty in his voice sent heat sharply through the room again. "Mate." The instinct lingered constantly now, not overwhelming, steady, persistent. Like both wolves already accepted something, their minds still approached carefully. Liessa set the herbs aside slowly. "Why haven't you pushed it?" Kaelor frowned slightly. "The bond." A long silence followed. Then Kaelor answered honestly, "Because every person in your life demanded something from you before proving they deserved it." That landed painfully deep. Liessa looked away first. Again, Kaelor noticed. Again, "You expect affection to become ownership eventually," he continued quietly. "Like kindness always hides conditions." The frightening part was how accurately he understood her. Years alone in the mountains taught Liessa survival, but not trust. Trust still felt dangerous. Kaelor stood slowly and crossed the cabin toward her. Large, careful, controlled. He stopped close enough for warmth, but not pressure. "I don't need you smaller to stand beside me," he said quietly. The words cracked something open inside her chest, because Darian spent years making her feel like inconvenience, disguised as affection. Weak Omega, embarrassment, burden. But Kaelor looked at her like survival itself deserved reverence. Liessa swallowed carefully. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Kaelor reached slowly toward her face, not forcing, offering. When Liessa didn't pull away, his rough fingers brushed lightly against her cheek for the first time. Gentle. Gods. So gentle. Her wolf moved beneath her skin immediately. Not frightened, curious, hopeful. Kaelor exhaled softly, like he felt the change too. "You know what I think?" he asked quietly. Liessa shook her head once. "I think your pack confused softness with weakness." His thumb brushed lightly across her cheekbone again. "But mountains don't protect fragile things for years." Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Liessa's throat. Nobody had ever looked at her survival with admiration before. Only pity or disbelief. Outside, Wind howled through the cliffs, while the cabin stayed warm around them, safe. And for the first time in years, Liesa realized safety didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like the massive alpha standing quietly in front of her, waiting for trust instead of demanding it. By early spring, Liesa's name spread beyond the mountains. Not as the rejected Omega anymore, not as the strange healer hidden in the cliffs, but as the woman the Alpha King protected openly. And wolf territories noticed everything. Messengers arrived first, then wounded wolves escorted through northern trails, seeking treatment inside Liesa's sanctuary cabin. Some came from neighboring packs, others came from rogue territories, too frightened to approach kingdoms directly. Kaelor allowed all of them passage. That alone shocked political leaders across the north. The Alpha King is sheltering rogues now? He's letting an Omega influence territory policy? Since when does Kaelor Draven answer to anyone? But the rumors changed quickly after wolves returned, healed from the mountains, because Liesa treated everyone equally. Pack wolves, rogues, hunters injured during border raids, even soldiers from rival territories. She never asked whose side they fought for first, only where they hurt. And somehow, that changed public opinion faster than politics ever could. One afternoon, Kaelor brought Liesa with him to a Northern Council gathering for the first time. The great stone hall fell silent the moment they entered together. Liesa immediately felt the stares. Nobles, generals, pack leaders. Most looked stunned. Others looked cautious. Because Kaelor walked beside her, not ahead of her, equal, intentional. A gray-haired alpha from the Eastern Territories finally broke the silence. So the rumors are true. Kaelor's expression stayed calm. Which ones? The older alpha studied Liesa carefully. That the strongest alpha in the north crossed mountains for an abandoned Omega. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, waiting, judging. Liesa recognized the atmosphere instantly. The same quiet cruelty she survived years ago. Only now, she didn't shrink beneath it. Kaelor noticed that too. The Eastern Alpha continued carefully. With respect, Your Majesty, some question whether becoming attached to a rejected Omega weakens your political standing. The room went completely still. Years ago, those words would have destroyed Liesa. Now they only sounded exhausting. Before she could answer, Kaelor leaned back slowly in his chair. Interesting, he said calmly. The older alpha frowned slightly. How so? Kaelor's silver eyes sharpened. You believe the judgment of one insecure pack heir determines her worth? Nobody spoke, because everyone knew exactly who he meant. Darian Voss. Kaelor continued coldly. The same heir currently losing allies because he publicly humiliated a loyal mate. Several leaders exchanged glances immediately. Political fallout had already started spreading through Frostfang territory. Trade agreements stalled. Border negotiations weakened. Other alphas questioned Darian's leadership openly now, because wolves who discarded devotion publicly rarely inspired trust privately. Kaelor gestured calmly toward Liesa beside him. Meanwhile, he said, the weak Omega you dismissed rebuilt half my northern wolf sanctuaries in one season. Silence deepened across the hall. No one could deny it. Wounded wolves survived because of her. Entire territories benefited because of her. And Kaelor looked proud, standing beside her. Not embarrassed, proud. The Eastern Alpha finally lowered his head slightly. My apologies. Liesa blinked once in surprise. Not because of the apology, because no one had ever corrected themselves for underestimating her before. Later that evening, Kaelor walked beside her through the snowy fortress courtyard. You enjoyed that, Liesa accused lightly. A faint smile touched his mouth. Watching powerful men realize they were wrong, he glanced sideways toward her. Very much. For the first time since her rejection, Liesa laughed without bitterness attached to it. And somewhere, deep in the northern territories, the girl once mocked beneath the full moon finally stopped feeling ashamed of surviving. Spring softened the mountains slowly. Snow melted along the cliffs in silver streams, while wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth surrounding Liesa's cabin. And somehow, Kalor stayed through all of it, not because duty required it, because he wanted to. The realization unsettled Liesa for weeks. Alphas didn't stay. Not without conditions. Not without eventually demanding sacrifice disguised as loyalty. But Kalor never asked her to become smaller around him. Never mocked her quietness. Never treated her survival like something shameful. Instead, he built shelves for her medicine jars after noticing she'd run out of space. He reinforced the cabin roof before heavy rains arrived. Once, Liesa even woke before dawn and found the Alpha King outside feeding an injured wolf pup with embarrassing concentration. "You're holding the bottle upside down," she informed him from the doorway. Kalor looked down. The pup blinked milk-covered eyes back at him. "I noticed eventually." Liesa laughed so suddenly she startled herself. Kalor stared at her immediately afterward, not because the sound amused him, because it mattered to him. "You don't laugh often," he observed quietly. The smile faded slightly from Liesa's face. "I didn't have many reasons before." Kalor looked at her for a long moment after that, then reached up carefully and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. No pressure, just affection, steady and patient like everything else about him. That terrified her sometimes, because cruel people were easier to survive than gentle ones. Gentleness made you hope. One evening near sunset, Kalor found Liesa standing at the cliffside overlooking the valleys below. Wind moved softly through her hair, while the fading light painted gold across the mountains. Kalor stopped beside her silently. "My wolf chose you long before I understood why," he admitted quietly. Liesa glanced toward him. "That sounds unfair." A faint smile touched his mouth. "To me or you?" "To your pride." Kalor actually laughed softly at that. The deep sound warmed something inside her chest. Dangerous. Beautiful. For a long moment, they simply stood together, watching the sunset spill across the northern territories. Then Liesa felt it, her wolf stirring beneath her skin. Not frightened, not defensive, wanting out. She stiffened instantly. Kalor noticed. "What is it?" Liesa swallowed carefully. "I haven't fully shifted since the rejection." Silence settled between them. Kalor's expression changed immediately. Not judgment, concern. "You don't have to explain." "I do." She looked away toward the mountains. "My wolf associated shifting with humiliation after that night. The memory still lingered sometimes. The laughter, the rejection, the shame." Kalor stepped closer slowly. "You survived by protecting yourself." That protection became fear. Kalor reached for her hand carefully. And fear can heal. The mate bond pulsed warmly between them. Steady, safe. For the first time in years, Liesa let her wolf rise fully beneath her skin without fighting it. Silver light shimmered softly around her body. Kalor stayed perfectly still beside her. No pressure, no expectation, only patience. Then finally, a small pale wolf emerged beside him beneath the evening sky. Not weak, not broken, beautiful. Kalor's wolf surfaced instantly in response, massive and dark beside her smaller form. But instead of overpowering, he lowered himself calmly beside her, equal protective, choosing. Emotion tightened painfully inside Liessa's chest, because for the first time in her life, her wolf no longer feared being seen, and the alpha, standing beside her, looked at both parts of her like they were something sacred. Spring arrived fully across the northern territories. The mountains that once felt harsh and lonely now carried warmth through the valleys surrounding Liessa's cabin. Wildflowers spread across the cliff paths, while young wolves chased each other through thawed grass near the sanctuary grounds below. Life returned everywhere, including inside her. Liessa stood near the overlook one quiet evening, watching the sunset spill gold across the peaks when Kalor approached from behind, carrying his coat over one shoulder. "You disappeared after the council meeting," he said. "I wanted quiet." Kalor stopped beside her. "With me or without me?" Liessa glanced sideways toward him. "You ask dangerous questions for someone that large." A faint smile touched his mouth immediately. The expression still startled her sometimes, not because it was rare anymore, because it was genuine. Below them, sanctuary wolves moved peacefully through the lower valleys, wolves once abandoned, injured, or hunted before finding protection here. Protection she built. Kalor leaned lightly against the cliff railing beside her. Darian lost 2 more alliance negotiations this morning. Liessa blinked once. That was fast. Turns out, neighboring packs dislike leaders who publicly humiliate loyal mates. No pity existed in his voice, only truth. Poetic justice had arrived slowly for Frostfang territory, and Liessa no longer felt guilty watching it happen. For years, she thought survival meant enduring mistreatment quietly. Now she understood something different. Some people destroyed themselves the moment they mistook devotion for weakness. Kalor studied her carefully. "You ever regret leaving them?" The question drifted softly between them, while mountain wind moved through the cliffs. Liessa thought about it honestly. The rejection, the years alone, the winters spent surviving without anyone beside her. Then she looked toward the Alpha King standing quietly at her side, the man whose wolf found her long before his heart admitted why. And suddenly, the answer felt simple. "No," she said softly. Kalor stayed silent, letting her continue. "If they hadn't thrown me away." Liessa looked toward the sanctuary below. "I never would have learned I could survive without them." Kalor's silver eyes remained fixed on her. And now, the question carried something deeper this time. Not curiosity, hope. Liessa stepped closer, slowly, until she could feel the heat of him beneath the cool mountain air. Years ago, she begged silently for acceptance from people who enjoyed watching her feel small. Now, the strongest alpha in the north looked at her like she was the safest place he'd ever found. The difference still felt unreal sometimes. Liessa reached up carefully and rested her hand against Kalor's chest, directly over his heartbeat, steady, certain. "You know what the strange part is?" she asked quietly. Kalor lowered his head slightly toward her. "What?" "I spent years proving I could survive alone." A pause. "But surviving and being loved properly aren't the same thing." Something vulnerable flickered across Kalor's face. Then, rare, honest. Liessa smiled faintly before continuing. "They rejected me like I was something shameful." Her fingers curled slightly against his chest. "Now they get to watch me, loved correctly." Silence followed, not empty silence, the kind that settles when two wounded things finally stop searching for exits. Kalor touched his forehead gently against hers beneath the fading spring light. And for the first time since the full moon rejection that shattered her world, Liessa realized something beautiful. The mountains hadn't hidden her away all those years. They had simply kept her safe until the right wolf finally arrived to find her.